I try to understand the behavior because I have this sort of lens, if you will, that all behavior makes sense. I just have to figure out why it's happening. Now, the explanation might be someone is mentally ill. The explanation might be someone's been through trauma. It might be, and so on. The explanation doesn't always have to make sort of logical sense, but if we understand how the brain works, we can figure out why these behaviors happen.
Okay, everyone. So welcome back to Your Body's Way. I am so happy to introduce to you John McLernon of the Freedom Nutrition Coaching. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Being Canadian, like it always sounds like very elegant when someone with like a British accent says my name. I'm like, oh wow, could you be my personal announcer?
Well, you're like, actually, my name is quite posh. I have quite a posh name when you say it like that.
Yeah, it sounds really posh. I'm like, this is great.
We were just talking, weren't we, about we've been talking about your coaching practice, but also what I also love about you and that I know about you is that you're like the podcasting king. And you're all about helping. You're helping everyone sort of, you're helping your listeners set up podcasts and get started.
Yeah. So I probably wear too many hats because I just have a heart for helping people. And so I do a type of like business mentorship. It's a one-on-one mentorship where I work with someone in an individual capacity. And that's really rare to find in the business mentorship space, because most people are looking for scalability and wanting to plug people into a group program. And I understand that, the pursuit of revenue and so on and so forth. But for me, it's more about creating an impact. And I only have so much capacity to work with people one-to-one. So if I can help another coach become a better coach, I create a ripple effect, which is like really, it's cool, because I think, if everyone had the goal to like help one person make one person's life better, or even if half the population of the world decided to do that, like what an amazing world we would have.
Yeah.
But the likelihood of that is relatively small. So I go, okay, well, I as one person, because maybe we ask the question, like, who am I as like one person to even have this idea of trying to make the world a better place? And I'm like, oh, well, I don't have to solve all the world's problems, but if I can help one person like live better and do that on a regular basis, then I can really create this positive ripple effect. It's like doing a small act of kindness. A common one we see over here is maybe paying for the person behind you in the drive-through lineup. Not that I'm a big fan of going through drive-through lineups, but I mean, it's a thing that people do, right? And so you pull up to get your, drink order or your meal or whatever, and it's like, oh, the person had already paid for it. And it's cool because you don't know that person or anything like that. But now, because you've been touched by something like that, there's more like that feels really good. Maybe I want to do that for somebody else. And so we have the ability to create a ripple effect. But I think it's really great that we actually don't get to see where that ripple goes, because we might make the mistake of making it about ourselves. And that's like really what we want to avoid.
So the ripple effects could go home to their families and then to their families, friends, and
well,
the
maybe
ripple
they
effect.
it's the pay it forward idea, right? So maybe somebody else goes and does something. Well, maybe I'll do something kind for somebody else, and so on. And so it's like we have the capacity to do that. And so whenever I feel overwhelmed by kind of the state of the world and disturbed by what I see happening in the world, and I think like, who am I and what can I do? It's like, well, I can do something kind for someone today, and that can lead to maybe them being inspired to do something more. We I think we underestimate, our ability as human beings to create a positive impact. And so a lot of people, don't take that step forward. But it's like, it's like casting a vote. One vote doesn't do a whole lot, or doesn't carry a lot of weight, but millions of votes do.
Yeah.
But it's a million individual actions.
Yeah, I really love that because it's something that everyone can do. And isn't it true that if you want to have a positive impact on the world, it starts with yourself. So being kind to yourself, and that in a moment we're going to come to your story, which is a really inspiring story. But it starts with yourself. Being kind to yourself, and then being kind to the people in your house. So your kids, your partner.
Yeah, it's like kind of the layers of our world, and we could start with like the internal world, our own internal world, then our external world, and then those who are in like our household, and then those who live in our neighborhood, and then those who live in our district, and so on, and it kind of expands like that. But you're absolutely right. And I think about like sort of my own journey, and we'll dive into maybe how I got to this place. But at one point, like I was just self-loathing. I hated myself. I was so distressed by who I was. I didn't recognize who I saw in the mirror, and it was like I was trying to hate myself into being a better person, better body, different health, all this kind of stuff. And of course, it doesn't work. But how I treated myself shaped my perception of how other people saw me, even though it
Mhm.
wasn't true. So it created a filter for my brain that I would perceive other people's judgment where there was none.
Yeah.
And that
And
would
then you
become this,
behave as such, and then you
yeah.
and then in turn they start treating you as such, and it's
Mhm.
like a vicious cycle.
Because I do think to some degree we instruct others how we want to be treated. Now,
Yeah.
that's not a guarantee they're going to treat us in that way, but how we treat ourselves is a template, in a sense, for how we allow or want others to treat us.
Yeah. And they have to be taught how to treat you. So you
Mm-hmm.
need to teach someone how to do that. It's,
Yeah.
and but that's something that a lot of us don't do, like, because we don't have the guts to say it, or
Mm-mm.
we just don't know how to teach someone to do that, but it is something they need to learn, right?
Well, what's I'm thinking what's super interesting about this. I mean, everything's fascinating to me. I'm just a very curious person.
Yeah.
But I reflect again on my own journey. I've got an amazing wife. We've been together for over 17 years.
Before you
Yeah,
continue, I'll just say, so this is your journey, right? This is your
yeah,
story.
yeah.
So let's dive in. So carry
Sure.
on. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the part that I wanted to share that was relevant to what you were just touching on there was I was for many years I was like the Tin Man. My wife would call me. Yeah,
I'm
in
trying
truth,
to I'm trying to think how, like, what's the connection there? I'm trying to figure it out.
well because
The
I don't
heart.
I'm yeah I'm like nothing like I was before. I'm empathetic. I'm connected to my emotions. I'm emotionally healthy, mentally healthy, and so on. But there was a time in my life where I wasn't, and a lot of that stuff was hidden and suppressed because of how I perceived masculinity, how I perceived or how I felt that I should behave in the world, and so on. And so my wife had to treat me in a certain way to kind of like reach me to and sometimes it was fairly blunt and fairly harsh because like it took that to like get through the layers to get some kind of reaction out of me because there's a lot of suppressed emotions, a lot of things that I was keeping buried and deeply hidden. And so as I kind of went on my own journey in terms of doing the work to recover from what I'd been through, and we can kind of go through how I got to that place,
Mm.
I needed her to change how she treated me because I was starting to become more sensitive, more in touch with my emotions, which I mean, I kind of smile, I chuckle a little bit because I was thinking if you'd have told me 5 years ago, like I'd be sitting here on a podcast talking about getting in touch with my emotions, I would have rolled
With
my
palm
eyes so hard.
trees in the background,
Right, right.
like anyone who's watching the video, they'll see.
Well, I would have rolled my eyes so hard they would have fell out of my head because I would have thought it was entirely ridiculous. And make no mistake, I love being a dude. Like I like being strong. I like being masculine. But there's this whole myth out there about like men and emotions, which is like totally stupid. We're emotional creatures too. It manifests itself a little bit differently, but there's such an important part of like our healthy existence. So I think the point of that was that I had to kind of almost confront my wife a little bit and say, "Hey, look, this is how you're treating me, and I understand you had to in past years, but right now, like this really sits wrong with me. It really frustrates me. Here's what and so on. And so we had to kind of like in a sense teach her this is how I want to be treated now. And we communicate very differently now. We have a much like we always had a good relationship, but now we have a fabulous relationship because we communicate very differently than we did before. And it all started with kind of the work that I needed to do within myself to move forward.
Okay, so journey back, because
Mm.
you've had quite a history in terms of how many hats. When you said you wear a lot of hats, and that's no underestimation, because
Mm.
you've taken on many kind of work roles in the
Oh
past.
gosh, yeah.
But then tell me how that tied into the emotional eating aspect, and then
Mm-mm.
how you overcame it, because there was like a time
Yeah.
in Istanbul, and I'll let you explain
Yeah,
it.
well, I'm like, let's just jump right off a cliff there. Um, uh, I I studied nanotechnology research at University of Victoria. So I was a chemistry major in organic chemistry, doing fancy research on things that eventually led to Blu-ray being developed. It's not like I had a big part of that, but that was the research I was
Mm.
working on. I got bored of that, so I joined the Navy. Became a Marine engineer. Spent 6 years in the Navy, and then I came home one day to my wife and was like, why don't we just go travel the world? Like I'm sick of being gone all the time. My wife's from Australia. Like, you're halfway around the world married to me, and I'm like never home. So we, within a couple months, we'd packed everything to a storage unit, hopped on a plane, and flew down to Mexico, flew to Puerto Vallarta, and then went inland to Guadalajara and started teaching English down there.
Wow.
And yeah, I would have never even like picked Mexico as a place to go to, truthfully. because I kind of, my perception of it was, Cancun or Puerto Vallarta, these sort of touristy destinations where people go for sun and beaches and whatever. But like we went inland, we went to actual, I won't say actual Mexico because, but like the Mexico that wasn't the tourist Mexico.
With the locals, basically.
Right. And had an
Yeah.
entirely different like lived experience there. But we carried on in our travels. Went to many different countries. But in Mexico, we met a guy from South Africa and became friends with him. And one of our places that we landed on was Poland, and we started teaching English there. And he actually came and taught English with us in Poland for a bit, but he had to return back to South Africa. And he's like, "Hey, you guys should come down." And my parents run this program here, and we're working with underprivileged youth, teaching life skills, helping them prepare for employment and whatnot, because South Africa is a very broken system. And so we thought, wow, this sounds amazing. Absolutely. Let's go down there and do this. And, we're reasonably seasoned travelers at this point. Like we've traveled a lot. We've been to third world countries. We've been to sketchy places and so on. And we usually have what's, how to sort of keep, doesn't, but it doesn't really matter. While in South Africa, at one point there, like I was attacked and I was nearly beaten to death. And it was I don't say that lightly, although I will say that I've done the work so I can speak about it. But I think what's maybe more valuable is like, rather than the gory details, is like kind of the fallout from that.
The trauma you must have felt.
Yeah. So because I say that nothing in life really prepares us like to go through something like that, to go through an experience where it's like these men wanted to kill me.
Well, where do you get the tools for that? How to deal with it? Like, no one
Yeah,
has these tools to kind of
I
teach you
didn't.
how to deal with it. Like,
Right. So I the first response is kind of like maybe the shocked response. They're not going to win. I'm strong, so on and so forth. But you know, then stuff starts like replaying in the brain and the situation. And if I knew this, I would have done this, and everything starts to sort of ferment in there. And then you get like the anger and the rage, and um, it becomes like emotionally exhausting. And there's also like anxiety that started to show up. And so to cope with all of this, I really started using food. And it wasn't like I made a conscious decision like, oh, I want to eat junk food to numb my emotions.
yeah.
It was much more, I think it's deeper and more subconscious than that. But it's like in its simplest form, I feel awful. I eat junk food. I feel better temporarily. And the brain learns a pattern. That behavior was solving a problem for me. The unfortunate part of it is it had a very a very detrimental side effect of significant weight gain. And it happened fairly rapidly. And that sort of led into the sort of self-loathing piece of the puzzle as well. What's
So you're
happened to me?
so you're feeling the trauma of the event, you're feeling the stress, the anxiety, but then now you're hating yourself.
Yeah,
Uh,
who have I
it-
become? I used to be an athlete,
yeah,
and now I'm
that's
just,
what makes it hard when you look back at who you were and you think you should be that person,
yeah,
forever. But and then when you're not, it's it's difficult to deal with.
yeah, yeah. So, and you referenced Istanbul. So my brother, to sort of where this came from, is my brother lives in Turkey. He's been there for about, at the time of recording this, he's been there for 13 years. And so we've visited many times. But at this point in time, after South Africa, we went back to Australia for a couple of months, and it was a good opportunity to kind of psychologically decompress. But like, I wish I could say it was just like that easy.
Yeah.
But we actually went back to South Africa for 2 more weeks. We felt like we wanted to have leave on a positive note. And so we did. We went to Western Cape, went to Cape Town. It's beautiful there. Like South Africa is a beautiful country, and a lot of the people are beautiful and hospitable and so on. But it's a broken country in so many different ways. And so then we went to Istanbul to live with my brother for a bit and just kind of figure out what are we going to do next. Like our world has kind of been shattered a little bit, more than a little bit. But I do remember like one night I couldn't sleep, and I was just like exhausted, just emotionally exhausted, tired of being angry all the time, tired of like wanting to act in a really vengeful way towards people, because like I knew like at the heart of this, like this isn't who I am, and yet it was all there in my head. And someone else quoted it was like my brain was an unsafe place to be. But
Mm.
where do you go? What do you
Yeah.
do when that's like your lived experience? Can't pull my brain out,
Mm.
can't hit the pause button on it. And this is, I think, what turns people towards, alcohol, drugs, food, whatever, because it gives us that temporary relief. So, but I just got tired of being angry all the time. That's the most exhausting and like draining emotion.
And
And so,
sorry, how many
go
years
ahead. Yeah.
was this? How many years was this between
Oh,
when you
getting
started
back to
emotional eating to then when you got to this point in Istanbul? How many
this was
years were you struggling with your weight
this
gain?
part. It was only about 8 months later.
Okay.
The story continues for about eight more years.
Okay. 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 Okay.
So, because and this, I think why I want to highlight this though is because maybe we think like I'll just get to this place, or I get to this place of healing, or I overcome this thing, and so on, and then it's all like dandy. And I'm like, well, there's layers to this onion.
Yeah.
There's like more to it. So kind of maybe the first place of, if I could say, healing that I got to was making the decision to forgive these men. Now I never saw them again, so I couldn't do this in person, and nor would I want to, because they would probably still have no thought of kindness towards me. But I had to make a decision to forgive them. And this is not about absolving them for what they did, but it was about setting myself free. So, and I go, well, how do I do this? Because it sounds easy, just kind of forgive them and move forward. It's like, well,
Mm.
there's actually kind of a process to this. It doesn't just happen like, or at least in my experience, it didn't just happen like this, where I just forgave them and I was totally free. I just walked forward. But what I would have to do is every time that I would start to be angry, and this rage would like start boiling up inside of me, and I would just think about all the violent things I wanted to do, then the violent retribution I wanted to carry out, like really nasty, and I would have to like pause and really ask the question, what happened to them? So what I mean is, what happened to them in their lived human experience that got them to this place where this is what they were doing with their life? Again, it's not to excuse their behavior because they murdered a guy the night before. I was a rando. It had nothing to do with, they didn't know me, right? They didn't know who I was. I say I was a representation of something they felt had historically oppressed them. So this wasn't about me. It was just about, really, it was about my skin color. And so then I had to ask, well, what happened in their life experience that led them to this place? And from there, I could begin to cultivate a sense of compassion towards them. Again, not to excuse what they did.
Mm.
I mean, three of them got caught. The fourth one, I don't know what happens. I was asked to go back for the court case, but I was like, I'm not going back. I did my time in South Africa. I'm not going back. Um,
It's
but
like
just
when
to,
it's sorry, it's like when they
yeah,
say if you're feeling anxious, it doesn't mean to get out of anxiety, you need to jump to happiness and joy. There's a
yeah,
scale that you need to work your way up to. So maybe if you're anxious, then can you reach for contentment, or can you reach for
mm,
just feeling okay? And it's the same for what you just said. Rather than being like, I forgive you, I wish you all the best, you just think, look, I
right,
feel you just
yeah. I wasn't quite feeling that.
yeah, but at least in that moment you could think to yourself, okay, I feel sorry for you
mm,
for what
mm,
you did, and that's the best you could do at the time. And I
yeah,
presume you had to keep on reminding yourself to do that, because like you said, you
mm-hmm,
don't just forgive and then that's it. Like for the rest of your life you feel like you've forgiven them and you're compassionate. Like
yeah,
it kind of weaves its way in and out. And you have to remind
yeah.
yourself, you have to practice the compassion, I can imagine.
Yeah, and it points to something that I often reference now, and it's not originally my quote, and I don't recall where I got it from, but it was that relapse is as natural to change as exhaling is to breathing.
Mm.
I thought, well, that's really fascinating, because now I look back and reflect, and I go, like, we're trying to unwire something that got wired into my brain in a very powerful way, and you don't just like cut the cord and it's all gone. Like it takes time, and you have to kind of weaken that neural connection and create a new connection in your brain, if I could put it that way. And essentially, we create connections either through repeated actions or through repeated thoughts.
And that goes for the emotional eating aspect. It goes for your forgiveness.
Yeah,
And it goes for everything, because do you know of Russell Brand in the UK?
I do.
He's
Yeah.
yeah. So he said something that's always stuck with me. He said, obviously we all know that he's overcome drug addiction, and
Mhm.
he's been sober for many years now. I don't know how many, probably over 10 for sure. But he said that yes, he's sober, but he has to remind himself every day to not take drugs or not
Mhm.
drink. Like every morning, he has to kind of say, I'm not going to do that today. And that just kind of shows, that kind of goes to your point about you just have to keep working at it
Yeah,
with
yeah.
everything.
Well, that's it. It's and he's a fascinating individual, by the way.
Mm,
I don't always listen to the content he puts out, but even if I don't agree with him, he's always thought provoking. And I think that's a missing thing as a side note, but I think that's a really missing thing. And that's why I love podcasting is we don't have to agree to have a meaningful and fruitful conversation.
mm.
And I think social media has like ruined that, where people that angrily scream at each other, in like this echo chamber. And it's like, no.
I agree. I mean, I find myself unfollowing like health gurus, as you say. I find myself unfollowing the ones who are just like trashing the others. They're just like,
Mm-mm.
oh, if this person says that, they're wrong. And I just all of that toxicity, I just find myself unfollowing those people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but it is
Yeah,
fascinating to
it
think
is.
about like what leads. Because I always I'm so curious that I like trying to go deeper, and I try to understand the behavior because I have this sort of lens, if you will, that all behavior makes sense. I just have to figure out why it's happening. Now, the explanation might be someone is mentally ill. The explanation might be someone's been through trauma. It might be, and so on. The explanation doesn't always have to make sort of logical sense, but if we understand how the brain works, we can figure out why these behaviors happen. But I think, isn't it interesting when you try to make your name off of trashing somebody else?
Mhm,
What kind of people are you attracting to you? Because you're not, that comes from this place of like scarcity. I'm
mhm,
not good enough, so I have to tear somebody down to sort of try and elevate myself. It's like, well, no, stand in your own power, stand in the power of who you are, the value you bring to this world. Let that shine. I mean, unless you want to attract negative, angry people, I guess, because I mean, the news does this, the news media does this. Let's just
this
make people angry relentlessly.
and we could get really sidetracked with this conversation. Because
We may
yeah,
just have to have another one then.
I think we might have to schedule another one just about all of the things we're going into here.
Yeah.
But I completely agree. And your body, your brain, they're fabulous things, and they only want to protect you. They're just
Mm-mm.
working in your favor all the time. And so when you said everything's perfect, you've just got to figure out why is your body emotionally eating. It's not because it's trying to attack you, it's because it's
Mm-hmm.
trying to fix something, it's trying to hide something. And was that the case for you?
For sure. And I didn't
Mm,
I didn't realize that, like, a lot of my, could I say, my insight or my understanding is in hindsight. I and this is probably why I struggled for so many years, because I was able to forgive those men, but I never I had a lot of work to get through. I hadn't It was almost like it was easier to do that than to forgive myself for who I'd become. It's Yeah. And so I struggled for years, and I focused on like trying to lose weight. And I believe the story that was in my head was, if I could just lose the weight, maybe I wouldn't be so despicable. I use a lot stronger language than that,
yeah.
but like, it's amazing sort of the cruelty we can express towards ourselves in the privacy of our own thoughts. Like, I just imagine if people ever heard the things I used to say to myself, they would have been horrified,
I think
you
a lot
know?
of people can relate to that listening.
Yeah. And I think why I like to share my story is not to put myself on a pedestal, because I'm just an ordinary dude in Canada who, like, wants to help people do amazing things. But I want to give people hope, because like I was in a really dark place. I was in a really difficult place where I was obese, I was angry, I was frustrated, I was burnt out, driving myself to a nervous breakdown, and I didn't see a way out. And I really couldn't see a way out because I never walked this path before. And this really points to the value of human connection. And this is where we'll shift gears just a little bit, but it's finally, like, out of desperation, I'd hired a coaches before, but it never really worked because I didn't know the help I needed and they didn't know how to help me. So it's not a knock on them, and it's just it was a mismatch. They weren't prepared, because we all thought my problem was, I'll just stop doing that thing
Go on
and
a
just do this
diet.
thing, right? Just do this thing over here. And so now, I mean, I very often talk about this, what I call living in the gap, and that's the gap between what we know and what we do. And a lot of people can't understand, well, why do I know that this is unhealthy, but I continue to do this behavior? And it's because they're coming from two different parts of your brain. The behavior is coming from a more powerful part of your brain than like your logical, reasoning, rational prefrontal cortex. So I hired this coach kind of in desperation, because I'd had this, I had to do like a health assessment for buying some additional life insurance. And it was like a cold, hard reality check. like couldn't get my blood pressure down to a reasonable level. Obviously my weight was where it was. I was over 300 pounds. Like I was just in a really, really awful place. Like I was down from my heaviest, but I had lost some weight, but I kept regaining it as well. There's that whole struggle.
Mm,
Our resistant biology, if you will, because we do have a famine biology that would like to store all the fat and move as little as possible and eat all the food because we're storing up for a famine. Like that's the biology we have. And it's why human beings are still alive after millennia of like food insecurity.
it
We
is.
didn't
And
always.
yeah, I mean, it's not just the emotional aspect that's involved. There's also the biological aspect where you
Yeah.
probably have to undo a lot of the metabolic um, kind of crisis that you
Yeah.
caused,
I
like
like that word,
the
metabolic crisis.
metabolic crisis. There is some undoing there as well.
Like
So it's
I
like
should create a new program and call it like solving your metabolic crisis or something like that.
I think it would do well because it's quite a powerful statement, isn't it? But
Yeah, like I love
it's
that language.
yeah, it's true though, because I can only imagine hormonally what was going
Mm-mm.
on, and just chemically, just everything
Oh
was probably
yeah.
against you at that time.
Well, I think there's like so much to unwind because on the one hand you're like, okay, my hormones are out of whack, so maybe I need hormone replacement therapy. But then you go, well, what are some of the things, the factors that drive like the different hormones in your body? Like we do have some influence over our hormone production, whether that's our stress management, our quality of sleep, how we nourish ourselves, and so on and so forth. And so for me, like my testosterone levels were through the floor. Like I basically didn't have any, and really what was taking place, I think, was testosterone precursors were being basically rerouted to create stress hormones to deal with everything that was like raging on the inside of me.
Because if you're in fight or flight constantly, your body doesn't care about the sex hormones anymore. I
Yeah.
mean, it's the
Yeah.
same for females. Everything kind of goes through the floor as
Mm-hmm.
soon as cortisol is elevated for too long.
Yeah.
And who wants to procreate
Yeah.
when
Well,
there's a stressful situation?
right. Biologically, it doesn't make sense.
Mm.
I mean, this is why when women do extreme diets, like they lose their period. They're literally losing their reproductive capacity because their biology, their biological wiring basically says you are not fit to procreate. You
Hmm.
cannot sustain an additional human life living like this. Isn't that it's fascinating to think about.
It's
Now that now
fascinating.
I'm a father and I'm like, and man, I love being a dad. This my little boy's amazing, by the way.
How old is he?
He's 19 months old.
Oh, bless, he's young. So I've got a
Oh
3-year-old
man.
and a 8-month-old.
Oh, like they're like being a dad's like the best thing ever. Like
Mm.
he comes running to the top of this because my office is downstairs, and he comes to the top of the stairs, and he can't say stairs, so he says shas shas, and what he's trying to say is I want to go down the stairs, and I want to see data, and it's like the greatest feeling in the world. Now where this sort of ties in is like 5 years ago I would have been a great dad. Like I would have, but I wouldn't. I wasn't in a good place, and now so I'm an older dad. I'm 40, and I think, man, like if I had had this kid, when I was in this horrible sort of emotional state, what chance would he have had? But now he's getting like this extremely healthy emotional like foundation in these most important impressionable years of his life because of the place that I'm in. And I got to this place to bring it back to our story, really because I finally I hired a coach, and I didn't know that this is what was going to happen when I hired this coach. I thought I was still hiring this guy to help me lose weight. And what happened was he treated me with compassion. And to me, that was like entirely foreign. First off, I would have thought compassion was weakness. Like, oh, that's, a weak emotion, whatever. Men, we're tough. Whatever.
Mm.
I'm a power lifter. Um, and he asked me a question that like, and I've mentioned a few times in different podcasts, but I said this question really changed my life. And this is not hyperbole when I say that. It highlights the power of a human connection that leads to the place where you can ask a really powerful question in a space of trust where vulnerability and authenticity is allowed. And that question can really, well, it can change your life. And it's why I coach. Because like there's the potential to do that with people. And for me, the question was, if you make a list of all the things you love and value, how far down the list do I go before I spot your name?
It's powerful.
Yeah.
Got little goosebumps there.
Oh. And so people might think, oh, you must have been like low on the list. I was like, I wasn't on the list. That list wasn't a part of like I was not a part of that list. It didn't enter my like sphere of consciousness that I was allowed to be even on the bottom of the list of things I love and value. That's the place I was in. So then I go, like, so it like shocked me. It startled me a little bit because first off, I was like, why are we having this conversation? Like, this is really uncomfortable. I thought we
Like
were just going to
this
talk
isn't
about
a
losing
man's
weight.
conversation.
Right. Macros and protein and lifting weights and pre-workout and what, so, but now he's like opened Pandora's box in my mind because I am a curious person. I go, well, I've got to figure this out. Like, I thought like self-love was, bubble baths and champagne and chocolate and wine and candles and I don't know, and which is just various forms of sort of nothing wrong with those things inherently,
Oh.
but
But to you,
emotional indulgence.
yeah, but like to you, a simple list, you're like, is this self-love? Like this is something I can do.
Yeah, and so what we going, well, how do I get to the place where I believe it's acceptable for me to love myself? First off, that was like the first stage, because again, it doesn't just like, oh, ta-da, the heavens have opened and now I'm a transformed person and now I just adore myself.
The weight's
Like
falling off and I'm feeling great.
yeah, yeah. I joke that like the real, so the way that I have this analogy when I go to coach somebody and I say, look, if this doesn't scare you away, then I think we can work together. So when people start to work with me, because they'll hear my story and they go like, oh, you're going to understand it. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why people work with me is because like, wow, you get it. And so you're not going to judge me. You're going to, but I'm still going to help them move forward. So it's like they show up, or maybe they expect I show up in their life and I've got two unicorn steeds with me here, and you're going to hop on this one and I'm going to hop on this one and we're going to ride our unicorn up the rainbow bridge, which will take us to the clouds. We're going to coast above reality, going from cloud to cloud with the perfect existence while this magical transformation happens. That's kind of what I think people visualize. Maybe not the exact thing. I've really worked on this analogy, but
Yeah, I
you
like
know,
it. Yeah.
like I'm going to go on this transformation. I feel so excited about the results I'm going to create. It's going to be amazing, and life is going to be perfect and blissful, and all of this. And I go, here's what it actually is going to be like. You're standing in front of a tunnel of sewage, and it's waist deep, and you've got hip waders on. You're finally at the place mentally where you're ready to wade through your sewage, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I come along and I go, hey, looks like you're about to navigate this tunnel of sewage. It's pretty tough to do this alone. Got hip waders, you could do it, but it's going to be a really tough slog. I've got a couple kayaks here. So why don't you hop in one of these kayaks and I'll go with you in this journey through the tunnel of sewage. A little easier to glide along the water than it is to, I mean, you're still with the smell. You still stink sometimes, but I got a headlamp so I can shine a light on where we're at. You know, we don't know all the it's not a straight tunnel. We don't know all the corners that are ahead, but I'm like an expert tunnel of sewage navigator, if you will. I've helped people through a lot of, I'm saying sewage to not say another word.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And at the end of this tunnel is, say $10 million, like, which is really just a metaphor for sort of a life of freedom ahead because you're a different person. And so I'm like, if you're ready to like go kayaking through a tunnel of sewage, we can do this, and at least it mentally prepares people for the fact that we're going to go into the ugly spots. We're going to go to the dark spots. We're going to shine a light on those demons. I call it, we're going to wrestle with those demons in the light, but I'm going to create that space for you. So here's what's beautiful about compassion. Compassion is not enabling. It is not me saying you've had a hard day, so just eat the rest of that cake or finish that bottle of wine or whatever. Just consume an emotional anesthetic because you've had a hard day. That's not what compassion is. It's actually a level above empathy. I view it as, I call compassion empathy 2.0, where it's really compelled by my desire to help someone alleviate their suffering. I'm going to help them move through this instead of try to dodge around it. And it's not enough to just sort of sit there. Empathy is like, I'm going to sit there with you in this, but compassion is, I'm going to help you move through this. And so it's, I think about, if I was to show up, let's say for whatever reason, you decided to hire me and I decided to surprise fly to your place or whatever and show up unannounced. And, you're sitting on the couch on like a Wednesday afternoon and there's like a wine glass there that's empty and a bottle of wine there that's empty. And, you're clearly not in a good place. Now, if I was to show up there and be like, Tamara, are you stupid? What are you doing? You know better than this. Why are you doing this? The immediate response is not, oh, I should probably change. It's like, I'm going to get better at hiding this behavior. Right? So judgment makes us want to hide our behavior. It does not motivate us to change our behavior.
And that
And
kind of goes for yourself as well. Like when you were talking like that, I was just thinking that's how you think when you're binging or emotionally eating. You're like, oh,
mhm,
you're disgusting. What are you doing?
yeah,
I hate this, and it's that
yeah,
judgment that
yeah.
just makes everything worse.
Well, yeah, I ask my clients all the time, I'm like, this really, really simple question. How is that working for you? And it's said without a trace of sarcasm. It's an honest question. In other words, is your current pattern of behavior producing the results you would like in your life? And if the answer is no, then we need to make a change. So enabling is, finish the bottle of wine. Judgment is you're an idiot for drinking the wine. Compassion is let's understand why you're drinking wine and see if we can find another way to help you move through this.
Mm. I really like that because if you think about a movie, it would be a really boring movie if the character set out on their journey and everything was great. They're just
Yeah.
like they're like, oh, I've got to solve this crime, and then they do, and there's no problem. So
Yeah.
that's sort of the first analogy that you gave. But
Hmm.
then the truth of the matter is, and why we're so attracted to movies and stories is because life is about that struggle, and it's never easy when you're overcoming
Hmm.
something so difficult. So it's what came to mind when you're speaking was the classic hero's journey, basically.
Yeah.
So you're the
Yeah.
guide, and the
Yeah.
client is the hero of
So
their life.
I like that. So here I have a couple of analogies, a couple of more. I have lots of
Yeah.
analogies. I should write a book of my analogies or
You
something.
should, yeah.
Um,
Go for it. I'm all ears.
yeah. So I'll say to my clients, I'm a tour guide, but I'm not a Sherpa. In other words, I will go with you. So for those who maybe don't know, a Sherpa is a guide who carries people's pack as they climb Mount Everest, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. Like, oh my
Mm.
God, these people, they're amazing. Um, but I do you a disservice if I take your backpack and carry that load for you, for starters, because you do not learn and grow. But also, I would die under the weight. I would be crushed under the weight of trying to carry everyone's backpack. That's not my role when I work with you. However, I'm going to help you. First, maybe we'll pause and take that backpack off. It's pretty heavy. Let's unpack the backpack. What are you carrying around with you that you don't need to carry anymore? What are you missing that would make this journey easier? Are there some tools that we can equip you with? And as we start to go on this journey, we might meet a trading post along the way, swap a couple things out. And, at the end of our journey, like I'll send you on your way and then I'm going to help somebody else navigate this. So that's my Sherpa versus tour guide, the short version. And then, I also am writing a book. Um,
Oh,
well,
congratulations.
thank you. I won't share the title yet because it's not, but I'm working on it.
Okay.
But I say to clients, like, I'm going to help you co-write a couple of chapters in your life story. By helping you co-write these chapters, we're going to change the ending of your story.
I like that.
Yeah,
That's really powerful. And the whole story that you have and the approach that you have is so refreshing. I've been interviewing women on this podcast, and that they're going to be the majority
for sure.
because my audience are female, mostly.
So is
But
mine.
it's
So,
right.
yeah.
But it's so refreshing to hear about this from a male perspective, because females are usually considered to be the emotional eaters, and the
Mm-hmm.
ones that bury their emotions and kind of eat to get by. And but
Men do it with
actually,
beer and steak.
right, and they don't talk about it as much,
Yeah.
like in generally. But what I did want to say, I mean, our conversation is going on so much longer than I thought, and because it's so good, so I feel like we need to do another episode for
We really
sure.
should.
Only because I need to pick up my kids. So,
Yeah.
but what I do want to say is, emotional eating is it's a cover up for emotions that you don't
Mhm.
want to deal with. Like you said, you eat and then you feel better. You don't have to deal with the emotions. And what comes to mind is, are you into like the spiritual teachers like Gary Zukov and Michael Singer and
Uh, I,
those
I would say
types?
I'm a Christian actually, and I don't really wear it on my sleeve. I kind of quietly go about it, but I could say I have some familiarity with that element of spirituality.
Yeah, it kind of ties into the things you're talking about, to be honest. But
Hmm.
basically, Gary Zukov, oh, I'm obsessed. He's the author of Seat of the Soul, which you've probably heard
Okay.
of. It's like a New York best-selling, book. But anyway, he basically says that our difficult emotions, even if we bury them in this lifetime with food, with alcohol, with drugs, that it doesn't mean that they go away. It just means that you're going to need to deal with them at some point. So whether it be in this lifetime or whether it be in the lifetime to come or the lifetime to
Hmm.
come
Hmm.
after that. Now I don't know what your beliefs are, and it's a very it's kind of a tricky
Well, it is because
conversation.
nobody
Yeah.
really knows,
Yeah,
right?
because
We're
no
like
one, nobody really
in this state
knows.
of being.
Yeah,
Well,
but the reason why I like it is because he's basically saying like whatever you're covering up, at some point you need to be compassionate, as you say,
mhm,
and actually kind of feel the emotions that you're feeling and identify them, name them, and just get to know them. And that's the
yeah.
first step.
It probably won't surprise you that I have an analogy for this as well.
Go for it. If it makes it more solid, then go
Well,
for it.
yeah, I think about a check engine light on the dashboard of a car. So you could be
Mm.
driving your car and this little yellow light comes on your dashboard. And it doesn't tell you what is wrong, but it tells you something needs your attention. Now, for most people, the response is to take a piece of black electrical tape and cover up that check engine light. That light is still on, trying to get your attention, but because you've covered it up, you can't see it. Now, what becomes like a problem that might need a little bit of attention can turn into a catastrophic failure if it's unresolved. And so ultimately, what we need to do is, we bring it to, let's say, a mechanic for a diagnostic, someone who understands engines maybe in a way that we don't, and they run a diagnostic and say, here's what the real issue is. And so, in a sense, this is what emotional eating is. It's that piece of electrical tape covering up that check engine light.
Mm-hmm.
And but we've also used the word story a lot. So in the interest of time, I want to slip this little plug in. I do have a podcast called Between the Before and After, and the subtitle is The Stories That Shape Us. And it really is about exploring people's stories of overcoming adversity. And it's really more about going into those difficult spaces, because so our brains are wired to learn from stories. Google did not solve all the world's problems. So
Mm-hmm.
this is not an information problem we are faced with. We have more information than ever in history before, a million times over. We're drowning in information, but it's not the solution. We're wired to learn from stories. So what we do is we listen to someone's story and we look for elements of ourselves in that story to see, can we see, is this possible for me? And so why people work with me, it's not because I look like a fitness model, because I don't. And for a long time, I really wrestled with that. I thought, who will take me seriously when I don't look like these ripped and shredded, you know, models on Instagram? Truth be told, they don't really look like that most of the time either, even if they have a really good physique. But what it's ended up being is they can relate. I can relate. I understand. They're like, okay, this guy's going to get it because he's lived it. In his story, I see elements of my struggle. So I know that he will understand. And it's like was it seek first to understand before we seek
Mm-hmm.
to be understood? When we need to feel like somebody understands, and then we feel like safe. Okay, you get it. So now it's safe to become vulnerable. Because if we try to become vulnerable in isolation, our primal brain just drives us away to shrink and to run away from this. We need somebody there who has our back. And then we go, okay, it's safe for me to be vulnerable because I know you're here with me in this really difficult experience. That's why coaching is still a thing. There's such a human element to it.
Yeah, that was a strong finish, I think. That was
That's,
great.
well,
We definitely have to do this again,
yeah.
just to finish. Basically, we need to finish this conversation, I think. But
Well, you will also come into my podcast.
oh yeah, oh, we can finish it there.
We can finish it
Awesome.
there.
But I suppose we'll finish with just where people can find you.
Well, you know what I would love more than anything else is for people to go and listen to Between the Before and After.
Okay.
I would love that. Now, if you want to talk about my coaching, you can go to freedomnutritioncoach.com. If you're a coach who wants to build an online business, johnmclernon.com. We can put those in the show notes. But my number one ask would be, hey, go and have a listen to that, because podcasting and sharing people's stories of overcoming adversity is truly my passion. And it's one of the ways that I believe I can really create a positive impact in the world. So the more people that hear it, the more it grows and the more people we can positively impact.
Perfect. Sounds great. Well, thank you so much, and sorry for the abrupt finish, but we'll be doing this again, and yeah, I look forward to it.